Well, last week I said we're going to do a short 3-week series that will pivot around the PR problem that we have as a church, as a Christian church, at the very essence of the gospel message. We are swimming against the current. And last week we talked about a piece that David Kinnaman had written, Unchristian, based on research that Gabe Lyons engaged in. This research is fairly current. And in it, I referenced a number of themes last week, and we talked about insincerity and how sometimes we've been accused of being insincere because we were insincere. Sometimes we're accused of being harsh and judgmental because we had been harsh and judgmental. And sometimes we're accused of being indifferent because there were times when we've been indifferent. It's not to say that have always been that, but we need to know that's the perception that the cultural context we live in has towards us. And so this morning I want to continue on that because I want us to really grasp this so that as we seek to equip the church and particularly engage the world, that we recognize the challenges that are before us in terms of our perception, in terms of the community's perception of us. And so today I want to talk about the all too frequently common perception that we are self-righteous, that we have a kind of moral superiority or kind of a moral elitism in our disposition, in our countenance. You may say, well, that's not me, and that, I pray, is not the case, that doesn't reflect you, but you need to know that that's the perception we have. And when you add to that kind of moral elitism or that moral superiority, that self-righteousness, and as repulsive and as nausea-creating as that is, you add to that hypocrisy, and you really have a double whammy here in terms of the damage that's done when an unbeliever, when someone outside the church, when someone who's skeptical or perhaps seeking, and they encounter that, they're just so pushed back from the gospel message because when they see hypocrisy and self-righteousness. When you listen to Kinnaman's research, again, this is not that. He assessed people who were lying themselves with being born again. These were young adults. And listen to these statistics again, although American, not that dissimilar in our context here. But when asked a number of questions, listen to these survey results. 59% believe that cohabitation is acceptable. We have a reputation. People know what we believe on this. But 59% of born-again individuals said this was not an issue. 58% believe gambling was acceptable. 57% believe that sexual fantasies are acceptable. 44% believe that having sex outside of marriage is not an issue. 37% have no problem with profanity or language. 35% no problem with getting drunk, excessive drinking. 33% have no problem or no issue with viewing pornography. This creates tremendous dissonance because while people might have all kinds of misconceptions about Christianity, we are typically associated with some moral positions and values on these themes, on cohabitation, and on language, and on gambling, and on sexuality. And when you experience these kinds of dramatic incongruities, that creates a dissonance. Ravi Zacharias tells a story in one of his books of a horrendous example of this kind of dissonance, this kind of hypocrisy, this kind of theory in use from espoused theory, the values in use from the espoused values. He talks about a friend he had, pastor, and how this pastor had the honor of performing the premarital counseling and the officiating wedding for a young couple, beautiful couple from his church, sharp. They both ended up studying medicine, and he had the privilege of marrying them, and he got a call in the middle of the night from the young husband, and he said, "Pastor, you got to come over here. I think I've lost her." And the husband was broken up and overwhelmed and hysterical. And the pastor runs over there. Of course, there are all kinds of medical professionals there as well. But when he got there and finally heard the whole story, it just made him sick, because here's how the story developed. This young couple were known on their campus for being thoughtful, passionate followers of Jesus. That was their reputation. That was what they were known for. Both in medical school, both studying medicine, and what had happened, she'd become pregnant. And this was an interruption into their very finely tuned plans. And they said, we cannot interrupt it. The plans are laid out. We'll have to deal with this pregnancy. But we have this reputation on campus for being pro-life and for being followers of Jesus. And so they determined they had enough medical knowledge that they could perform an abortion, they could perform the procedure in their home privately, to do it themselves because of their levels of medical training, they thought. And so they made the plans to meticulous plans to perform this procedure. And when they did, the husband inadvertently gave his wife too much anesthetic, and he lost her. That may be a dramatic example, but you and I sometimes have espoused theories and espoused values, things we say are true about us, but we may not have a lifestyle which complements them. I said this last week. The people that most exasperated Jesus, that Jesus was most frustrated with, and that he was most harsh with, if you will use that word, were the Pharisees, right? Because of their contradiction in their espoused theories, and their espoused values, and their values and use. I want to read to you an interchange that Jesus has with his disciples, with his followers, and presumably some in that audience, Pharisees. Matthew 23. I'm just going to in large measure read this, but I want you to hear how Jesus feels about self-righteousness and about hypocrisy. Matthew 23. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, he says. And of course the scribes, these are the academics, the Pharisees, these are the clerics. They were respected, they were sometimes feared, but they had power. And he says, they sit on Moses' seat. So practice and observe what they tell you. When they tell you God's law, you listen and you follow it, you observe it, but not what they do. For they preach, but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. They make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love the place of honor and feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplace and being called rabbi by others. You're not to be called rabbi. They were all about image. And their phylacteries, they were little leather pouches with scripture. It's like a big Bible case, if you will, or some sort of symbol of their devotion. They love titles. They love to be called certain things. In this case, rabbi. But you're not to be called rabbi. We have one teacher, and you're all brothers and sisters in Christ. Call no man father, nor for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be a servant. And whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. But woe to you, this is a denunciation. He denounces them. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, those who play it out, or play act, or act. These are charades. These were actors. For you shut the kingdom of God in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to, again, a denunciation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Again, he calls them that. For you travel across the sea and land to make a single proselyte, and when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. feel the weight of Jesus' anger. Woe to you, again a denunciation, blind guides. You are so blind you are not even aware of your condition. It's like the early stages of cancer. You have it, you just don't know it. And they were completely unaware of their self-righteousness and their hypocrisy and the damage they were doing. Who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it's nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he's bound by an oath. You blind fools! For which is greater, the gold in the temple that has made the gold sacred? And I say to you, if anyone swears by the altar, it's nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that's on the altar, he's bound by it. You blind men! For which is greater, the gift or the altar on which the gift is made sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it, by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it, and him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it. What's he saying here? He's saying, well, they had all these promises and all these oaths, and if you said it a certain way, it mattered. It stuck. But if you didn't say it the right way, you could get out of it. And so they added to the law of Moses, and they added these promises, these oaths, and these formulas, as if they were magical words. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin. You've neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat while swallowing a camel. They tithed, and they wanted everyone to know how they tithed and how generous they were, and yet they neglected the more weightier matters, he says. Justice, mercy, care and compassion for the marginalized. He says, it's right to give. It's right to be generous, but you've missed so much. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside you're full of greed and self-indulgence, you blind Pharisees. First, clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside might be clean also. Fine bone china and full of mold in the inside. Woe to you, again, denunciation, you scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you're like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead men's bones, uncleanliness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. This is a cherry wood coffin. It's full of dead men's bones. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monument of the righteous, saying, well, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part in the shedding of blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Do you hear the anger and the disappointment and the frustration that Jesus has? These, in Jesus' estimations, were spiritually dead. They were frauds. But what angered him so much was not sin as an abstraction, but the brokenhearted reality. They knew better. They knew better, and not only did they know better, they espoused better. They said, this is what we believe in, and then they didn't practice the very things that they said they did. And Jesus says, you listen to what they're saying, but don't act the way they act. Don't do what they do. Now, this was Jesus to a particular group of people, scribes, Pharisees, lawyers of his day, academics and clerics of his day, who were dramatically guilty of incongruities, inconsistencies, and hypocrisy. But I want you to feel the weight of it, because when you and I look in the mirror, and if we can have the clarity of sight to see those times in which we're espousing one thing and living something else, that we so disappoint the heart of God, and we so besmirch the reputation of Christ, because we're one, right? Someone espouses faith, someone aligns himself with the message of Christ, and then lives that kind of dramatic incongruity. That hurts us all, and that's why we have a bad reputation. because of those bad experiences that people have had with self-righteousness and with what? This is dark. This is dark. And sometimes we've been insincere, and sometimes we've been harsh and judgmental, and sometimes we've been indifferent, and sometimes we've been self-righteous and hypocrite. And so when people say the church is full of hypocrites, well, you're right. So how are we going to change that? How can we let some light into this darkness? Now, Jesus, in this occasion, doesn't move us into solution, but let me open up some windows that let some light into our perspective and how we're going to help being on the solution side of things as it relates to the public relations image that we have, the problem image we have. So, first window. Great little story in Luke chapter 5. Jesus is unfolding his identity gradually through all kinds of teachings and all kinds of miraculous works. And in chapter 5, he says to Simon, let's go under the water, there's such a crowd. And Jesus teaches from the boat. And so Jesus engages in some teaching. And then he engages in conversation with Peter. And Peter's bent. Jesus, I've been fishing all night. There are no fish left in the Sea of Galilee. They're gone. And Jesus, whoa, so put the nets over here. And Peter pulls in a big haul. And in chapter 5, verse 8, this is what it says. And when Simon Peter saw it, that is this incredible haul of fish, he fell down on Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, Lord. He and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so what Luke has been doing with us, and what he's been showing to his readers, is this Jesus isn't just another prophet. Jesus is the Lord of the demons, and Jesus is the Lord of life and death and his healings, and Jesus is the Lord of creation and the creatures of creation, and here demonstrated through this miracle with these fish. And Peter is slowly getting it. This isn't just another man. And they're gradually becoming increasingly aware that he is in the presence of the divine. He falls on his knees. He says, Jesus, I am so messed up. I am so broken. I am so sinful. You need to depart from me. And what's going to help us change our public relations image, our image before a watching world, is that we lead with a spirit of humility and an attitude that acknowledges our own sinfulness. Stay humble. This is for me. This is for you. This doesn't nullify our nobility. This doesn't nullify our being made in the image of God and our value. But you and I are so messed up and so broken. And the longer I walk with Jesus, the more sinful I become. Not that I do more sins, but the more I revel in my relationship with Christ, the more I see, wow, his grace is so incredible because I'm just so messed up. You're messed up. And when we have that kind of humility, that kind of countenance, that kind of disposition, arrogance and pride and elitism and superiority isn't going to seep out of the pores of our life, but humility. Stay humble. Stay humble. Unlike the disposition of the Pharisees. Another window. Let's open another window. A few chapters later, Jesus is having supper with a religious leader, a Pharisee, as a matter of fact, also by the name of Simon, different Simon, but here he's having a dinner with a Pharisee named Simon in chapter 7. And at this dinner, it's kind of a public dinner where there's invited guests and uninvited guests. There's all kinds of people in his home. And one of the people there in his home is a woman with a reputation of being very morally loose. Implication is she's a prostitute. And she's there at Jesus' feet. You know the story. She's there at Jesus' feet. She's broken open this alabaster jar, and she's weeping, and she's covering Jesus' feet, and she's crying, and Simon says, look at her. Surely you know who she is or what she is. Jesus doesn't miss a beat. He tells him a short story on debts and on forgiveness. And then he asks him a question. And Simon gets the right answer in the little test afterwards. But then it says this in chapter 7, verse 44. And turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, I like this. So here's Simon sitting beside him. Here's the woman at his feet. He's talking to Simon, but he looks at the woman. Just have that picture in your mind. And he says, do you see this woman? I entered your house, you gave me no water for my feet, but she's wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss. But from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, forgiven. For she loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little. And then he said to her, your sins are forgiven. And he ends by saying to her, your faith has saved you, go in peace. Now, we're not told if this woman had any other interchange with Jesus before, but it's absolutely clear she must have heard what Jesus was saying, because she was coming to Jesus looking for mercy and looking for grace and looking for forgiveness. And here was a woman so overwhelmed with gratitude. She was so aware of her brokenness and her sin that her worship was so alive and so passionate and so sincere and so authentic. She couldn't help but take all that she had, the very best she had, pour it on Jesus' feet and weep and cry and wash his feet. So great was her gratitude. And so every time you and I have communion, every time we remind ourselves afresh of the gospel, don't ever forget what the gospel's done for you and for me. We are broken and we're sinful. And Jesus came to rescue us, to forgive us, to reunite us with God. That's the good news. And so we ought not to have a countenance of self-righteousness and superiority and elitism, but one of humility, stay humble, and one of gratitude, stay grateful. One more quick window. It's a passage that Dan read to us. In 1 Corinthians 10, Paul gives the Corinthians a lesson. He does case study in the Old Testament. And he talks about Israel had this privileged position. He gives them 5 areas where they're just so blessed. And they had the oracles of God. They had all these expressions of God. God was engaged in their lives. They had all these manifestations of God. And then he talks about how they blew it. And he actually gives 5 areas in which they've messed up. And so he gives them this story. He reminds them of some of these episodes where Israel dropped the ball. And then he says to them in chapter 10, verse 11, now these things happened to them as an example, but they're written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. This is a great little hermeneutical insight. He says, look, learn from them. Look at all the good they had. Look at the bad choices they made. And then he says this, therefore, in light of the historical happenings of the story in the nation of Israel. Therefore, let anyone who thinks he stands take heed, lest he fall. Don't get cocky. Don't think you're above it. Paul says the same thing in Galatians 6:1. He says, if someone gets caught in a sin, you who are spiritual restore them, but be careful that you don't get ensnared yourself. Don't get cocky. Don't presume that you're somehow above it all. So here he cautions us that sin is, that we're just 1 or 2 bad decisions away from being in the ditch ourselves. But then he says something different. He says that no temptation is overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful and he will not let you be tempted beyond what you're able. But with the temptation, he will provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. And so here he introduces a kind of tension. He says, look, you are weaker than you think. Don't get cocky. but you also have access to more strength than you realize. So, what are the windows that give us some light into our self-righteousness and hypocrisy? Stay humble. You and I, every one of us, just one bad decision away from the ditch. Stay grateful. Don't think God got a good catch in it. You and I are the recipients of the lavish, generous grace of God. But also, live in that tension of be aware of your potential for evil, but stay committed to righteousness. There's always a way out. Stay committed to virtuous living. Stay committed to a high moral framework. Stay committed to a higher standard, because we have all the resources in the power of the Holy Spirit to live out that new kind of life that conforms us to the image of Jesus. We have a perception problem. We are perceived as self-righteous and hypocritical. Sometimes, the accusation is fair. Let's be humble. Let's be grateful. And let's continue to hold high a high moral framework, integrity, virtue, righteousness, so the world would see that demonstration of our values in our actions as well as through